I'm a junior, and this is my trigonometry spring panel. And I'm going to be talking about the daylight hours in Eugene, Oregon. Eugene, Oregon is a state in the northwest of the United States. This city is slightly more north than New York City in terms of latitude. In Eugene, they get very little sunlight. Because of the very little sunlight they get throughout the year, they are very vulnerable to seasonal depression. For farming in Eugene, Oregon, it's mostly the older generation who would be farming, but they haven't passed it down to the younger generation. And this could be because of the very little sunlight that they get. They would need more sunlight to grow plants. Maybe when they were younger, there had been more sunlight. Perhaps the location was facing the sun more before. This table shows the daylight hours during the seasons. You can see the day number of the leftmost column, the sunrise times, the sunset times, and to the right you can see the hours of daylight. For Eugene and Oregon, their maximum hours of daylight is 15.68. Their minimum hours of daylight is 8.70. This is the equation to find the midline, the D value. 15.68 is the max and 8.70 is the minimum. So adding the minimum to the max, dividing that by 2, would give us 12.19, the midline. To find the value, the amplitude, to find the A value, the amplitude, I took the max, 15.68, and the midline, 12.19, and subtracted the midline by the max. And in result, got 349 for the amplitude. Amplitude tells us how extreme the daylight patterns will be. The bigger the amplitude, the more extreme the pattern. More extreme daylight would mean longer daylight during the summer and shorter daylight during the winter. And here is the horizontal shift, the C value. This is when the spring equinox is. And for Oregon, because it's in the north, that's March 21st, which is day 80. If my city had been in the southern hemisphere, the horizontal shift would be 264, which is September 21st. The frequency, the B value, is always going to be 1 because there's only one rotation on Earth that completes the sun every 365 days. The frequency for all of the cities will be equal to 1 because one rotation around the sun is how we define our year. And with this formula, this is the equation I got. Now onto the graph. This graph shows the daylight hours we're going to be experiencing during the seasons. The daylight hours start to increase during the spring and the summer. After the summer, they start decreasing up until winter, and then they increase again. We use the table to create the points on the graph. Then we use the table to help us come up with this equation. We can see the parts of the equation in the graph itself. Okay, onto the comparing graphs. Both Eugene and St. Petersburg have the same horizontal shift. They have midlines that are close to 12 and their frequencies are both 1. These cities have different amplitudes. St. Petersburg has a much bigger amplitude than Eugene. This means that St. Petersburg has more intense daylight patterns, really long hours in the summer and really short hours in the winter. These cities have the same midlines, 12.19, and the same frequency, but they have different horizontal shifts. And different amplitudes. The amplitudes are different because they are at different distances to the equator. The horizontal shifts are different because the cities are on different hemispheres. Oregon being in the northern hemisphere and Tasmania being in the southern hemisphere. Both Monteverde and Eugene have the same frequency 1, same horizontal shift, but they have different amplitudes and different midlines. So the equation I showed in like slide 12 maybe, I used, like I said before, I used for my equation. So the A value represents the amplitude or how tall the curve would be. The B value represents frequency, how many cycles the Earth goes in every 365 days, which is always going to be 1. C value is the horizontal shift, which represents the first day of spring. The D value is the midline, which represents the middle of the graph, the middle of the year. .49 is the middle for Eugene, is the midline for Eugene. The frequency, like I said before, is 1 because there is only one cycle every 365 days. Horizontal shift is 80 because that's when spring starts for Oregon, day 80, March 21st. The amplitude in Oregon is 3.49, which means less daylight, which supports the fact that Oregon experiences very little daylight for most of the year.